They say a family can vanish without a trace, but that's not entirely true. Something always remains. A sound that never stops echoing, a shadow burned into the walls, a smell that never leaves the earth. In a quiet town outside of Dayton, Ohio, there once stood a small white house with faded blue shutters. The grass grew uneven, the mailbox leaned slightly forward, as if tired of waiting for someone who would never return. Neighbors used to say the Walkers were the kind of family you'd never expect to make headlines. Church on Sundays, barbecues in the summer, Christmas lights hung exactly on time, nothing extraordinary, which in hindsight might have been the strangest thing about them. Because one cold November morning in 1987, the entire Walker family, mother, father, 2 children, and the family dog, were gone. Not missing, not murdered. Gone. Their dinner was still on the table, the television was playing static, the front door was wide open, though no one could find a single footprint in the fresh snow. It was as if the family had simply stepped out of their lives, erased from the map, leaving the world to fill in the blanks. What came next would fracture that small Ohio town in ways no one could have imagined, because as the investigation deepened, people began to notice things about the Walkers that never made sense. Their phone lines had been cut weeks before they disappeared. The father's work record stopped abruptly, as if he'd never been employed at all, and their oldest daughter's birth certificate turned out to be a forgery. But the strangest part wasn't what was missing. It was what was found, sealed in the walls of that White House, behind layers of wallpaper and time. A discovery that would turn a family's disappearance into a legend whispered by those who lived long enough to remember. Every town has its secrets. Most are buried deep on, or to be forgotten. But sometimes one surfaces, like a bone rising from the soil, and forces you to look directly into the face of something you were never supposed to see. This is the story of the family that disappeared from their own neighborhood. When the police first entered the Walker home, they expected signs of a break-in, a shattered window, overturned drawers, anything. But everything was in its place. The dinner table was still set for 4, each plate half-eaten, each chair pushed neatly back. The television hummed with static, the glow flickering across the living room like a heartbeat. A single lamp was still on. The clock on the wall had stopped at 9:47 p.m. Neighbors told investigators they hadn't seen the family for a few days, though no one could agree exactly when the house went quiet. Some said Tuesday night. Others swore they saw the father, Robert Walker, mowing the lawn on Thursday morning. But the snow that fell Thursday night showed no signs of footsteps, tire tracks, or anything resembling movement. Inside, officers noticed subtle things. Things that didn't fit the image of a normal disappearance. There were no family photos on the walls. The frames were there, but every image had been carefully cut out. The closets were half empty, drawers partly cleared. The refrigerator had been unplugged, but its contents were fresh. And in the basement, in a small locked room at the far end, they found dozens of journals filled with the same sentence written over and over again. They know who we are. It wasn't until they sent the writing off for analysis that the investigators realized the entries had been written by 3 different hands: Robert's, his wife Elaine's, and their daughter's, each in different ink, each in a slightly different tone. The town, desperate for answers, began to turn on itself. Rumors spread like fire. Some claimed the Walkers were part of a government experiment. Others whispered of something darker. An old family curse tied to the land itself. People said the property had been built over an abandoned orphanage, one that mysteriously burned down in 1932. The story changed depending on who told it, but one thing never did. Everyone agreed the house was wrong. Within weeks, the investigation hit a wall. No fingerprints, no blood, no financial records, and no trace of the family's car. Just a frozen moment in time, a perfect snapshot of normal life, captured right before everything went silent. But silence can be deceiving, because 2 months later, nearly 70 miles away, someone reported seeing a woman who looked exactly like Elaine Walker, standing barefoot on the side of a rural highway, holding the hand of a small boy, staring into the woods. The sighting was brief, no more than a few seconds. The driver, a trucker named Harold Green, swore he saw her around dawn just outside Chillicothe. A woman in a pale blue nightgown holding a boy's hand, both of them motionless, watching him as he passed. He didn't stop, not then. He said something in their faces made him keep driving. They looked, he later told investigators, like they were waiting for someone who never came. When police searched the area the next day, they found nothing, no footprints, no clothing, no signs of struggle, but they did find one thing. A small, hand-drawn picture in the dirt beside the road. It was crude, childlike. 4 figures standing in front of a house, and above it, written in shaky letters, one word, underneath. The investigation reignited. Search teams were sent back to the Walker property, where a new owner had already moved in. The basement, once thought to be fully cleared, was reopened. Beneath a loose concrete slab, officers found a crawl space that hadn't appeared on any of the blueprints. Inside it were several rusted tin boxes filled with letters, dated between 1954 and 1968, all addressed to someone named Miss Lillian. None were signed. The letters were haunting. They spoke of experiments in memory separation, of a neighborhood program meant to study the long-term effects of isolation and false identity. They mentioned families planted in small towns, living fabricated lives under supervision, and then withdrawn when their purpose was complete. The FBI quietly took over. The house was sealed off. Within days, the local police were ordered to cease communication about the case. Records vanished. Officers were reassigned, and just like that, the Walkers became a ghost story. But even ghosts leave fingerprints. Over the years, people who lived near the old Walker home reported strange things. Light that's in the basement window, voices in the walls, laughter where there should have been silence. Some said they saw a man who looked exactly like Robert Walker walking down the road at night, wearing the same clothes he'd been last seen in. Others claimed to receive letters, no return address, no stamp, with the same words written inside. They know who we are. And then, 30 years later, something unexpected surfaced. A home video that would change everything. The tape surfaced in 2018, found in a thrift store in Cleveland, an unmarked VHS cassette tucked inside a box of old Christmas decorations. A collector of vintage electronics bought it, thinking it might contain old commercials or forgotten sitcom recordings. But what played on that screen was nothing anyone could have imagined. The footage began with a faint humming sound, like an electrical drone. The image flickered, unstable. Then, the Walker living room appeared, instantly recognizable from the crime scene photos, though it looked cleaner, newer. The walls were brighter, the furniture freshly arranged. The camera panned slowly, almost deliberately, as if documenting something for evidence. Then, the family came into frame. Robert, Elaine, and the 2 children, smiling stiffly, like people told to pretend they were happy. They sat together on the couch, eyes fixed not on the camera, but slightly above it, as if watching someone behind the lens. The father raised his hand and waved once. The mother followed. The children didn't move. They didn't blink. The tape continued for 13 minutes. No one spoke. The family just sat there, smiling, occasionally shifting slightly, their eyes empty, their movements robotic. At the 11-minute mark, the younger child, the boy, began to cry. Not loudly, but softly, like he was trying to stop himself. The father's smile twitched, froze, then turned into something that looked like terror. At 13 minutes and 27 seconds, the screen went black, but the audio kept playing for another 2 minutes. In that static, if you listened carefully, you could hear whispers, dozens of overlapping voices repeating fragments of sentences. They're still watching. Don't look under. It wasn't supposed to be recorded. Experts analyzed the tape, but the film stock dated inconsistently, manufactured sometime between 1985 and 1993, yet degraded as if it were 50 years old. No fingerprints were found on the cassette, no signs of tampering. But the most chilling discovery came from the final few seconds. When the footage was digitally enhanced, Investigators noticed something reflected in the television screen behind the family. A dark shape standing in the corner of the room. It wasn't one of them. It was tall, almost faceless, its head tilted slightly downward, as if watching them perform. No one knows who filmed it or why, but the timestamp in the lower corner read the one thing investigators could confirm: November 21st, 1987. The night the walkers disappeared. After the tape was made public, it spread quietly across online forums, shared by night owls, conspiracy theorists, and the kind of people who dig through forgotten corners of the internet. Most dismissed it as a hoax, but those who watched it carefully noticed something that the experts had missed. At exactly 7 minutes and 9 seconds, the daughter, the older child, turns her head slightly toward the camera. For a single frame, her face distorts, like an image pulled out of sync with reality. Beneath her skin, you can see movement, something shifting, almost crawling. Some viewers claimed they could see another face flicker there, faintly visible beneath her own. Others said her eyes didn't belong to her at all. When word of this spread, an anonymous user posted what they claimed to be excerpts from government archives. The documents, blurred and heavily redacted, referred to something called Project Mirror Town, an experiment in collective psychological conditioning run during the late 1970s. The purpose: to simulate entire families, implanting them into rural communities as a form of live behavioral study. The participants, it said, were non-consensual. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? By now, local historians and journalists began revisiting the old stories, re-examining the timeline. The orphanage that burned down in 1932 had supposedly been funded by a company called Eastridge Development, the same company that built the Walker neighborhood in the 1970s. Eastridge was tied to defense contracts, research labs, and a long paper trail of discontinued projects. No one had ever heard of them since 1989, the same year the Walker's case was officially closed. And yet, 2 years after the tape surfaced, a strange pattern began to emerge. Family sound from other states, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, even upstate New York, reported finding similar VHS tapes hidden in their attics or behind walls during renovations. Each one showed a different family, always sitting in the same pose, staring just past the camera, always smiling too long. One tape even contained a handwritten note: "When they look away, that's when they start to remember." The question now wasn't just what happened to the Walkers, but how many other families had vanished the same way, erased, replaced, and buried beneath the illusion of normal life. There's a theory, one that never made it into any official report, that the Walkers didn't disappear from their home, but into it. That the house itself wasn't built on cursed ground, but designed for something else. Researchers who've studied the blueprints say the original foundation has inconsistencies, walls that don't align, rooms measured in impossible dimensions, vents that lead nowhere. One investigator described it as a house that folded inward. When ground-penetrating radar was finally used on the property, it revealed chambers beneath the home, spaces without any known access points, empty cavities hidden beneath the floorboards. But emptiness can hide more than walls. It can hide time. A man named Frank Donovan, a retired city surveyor, came forward in 2020 with a story that shook what little was left of the case. He claimed that during construction in 1974, he and his team were ordered to pour concrete over an already existing structure. When he asked what it was, he was told it was testing architecture, something to do with spatial containment. He was paid double for his silence. The Walker house wasn't the first of its kind. 3 others existed across the Midwest. All were demolished, except this one. The more you trace the history of that neighborhood, the less real it becomes. Property deeds lead to non-existent banks. Phone numbers connect to defunct government lines. Even the street itself, Barrow Lane, was erased from local maps in 1992. When you search it now, it simply doesn't exist. But that hasn't stopped people from trying to find it. Urban explorers, true crime enthusiasts, ghost hunters, they all talk about the same thing. A road that shouldn't be there, a row of houses that flicker between presence and absence. One moment, nothing. The next, a faint outline under the moonlight. Some claim to have reached it, only to find themselves driving in circles, headlights reflecting off mailboxes with no names. The Walker home, they say, still stands, not visible in daylight, but under certain conditions. Fog, low pressure, the air thick enough to taste. That's when it appears, and if you stop, if you look long enough, you might see a faint light in the window. Some call it myth, others call it a memory, replaying itself. But those who've been there say the same thing. It feels like the house is waiting. In 2023, a man named Daniel Cross claimed to have found the Walker house again. He wasn't a thrill seeker or a ghost hunter. He was a genealogist, tracing his own family roots through Ohio census archives. That's when he noticed something strange. His grandmother's maiden name was Walker. Her birth records, however, didn't exist before 1950. Every trace of her childhood seemed to lead back to Barrow Lane. He posted his findings online. Blurry photos, fragments of letters, and what he said was a new recording found in a thrifted answering machine. The voice on the tape was distorted, warped by age, but unmistakably human. A woman whispering, "If you find this, don't look for us. We remembered too soon." 2 days later, his account vanished. His website redirected to a government error page. His apartment, according to neighbors, was cleared out overnight. The landlord said he'd moved out voluntarily, though no moving truck was ever seen. It's almost poetic how stories like this end. The families disappear, the records vanish, the land swallows everything. What remains are fragments, whispers, photos, things that refuse to stay buried. But there's something about the Walkers that still haunts anyone who dares to follow the trail. Because if you trace their lineage far enough back, it doesn't just vanish, it loops. Their ancestors show up under different names in census data across decades, same faces, same children, repeated generations apart, as if the family had been reset. The legend says the Walkers weren't the victims of a crime. They were the subjects of a return, called back into whatever experiment had created them. That's why the walls hid messages. That's why the tapes showed families that didn't age. That's why the house, even now, still flickers in and out of existence. No one knows what Barrow Lane was meant to study, but some say the families weren't watching us. We were the experiment, and they were the control. And if you listen closely, when the night is cold and the static hum of a distant television seeps through the walls, you might still hear them. The sound of cutlery on a dinner plate, a father's voice, gentle and practiced, a child's laugh caught in a loop, always beginning, never ending. The Walker family didn't vanish. They went home. And maybe that's where they've been all along.